Hey everyone, this is Mason and you're listening to Herb Rally. Today's episode is another edition of the Herbalist Hour, and this one is super special to me because we had on the whole crew from the Columbines School of Botanical Studies. And as some of you may know, I attended the Columbines School of Botanical Studies back in 2011 and 2012 and 2013. So I'm incredibly honored to have everyone on the show, and we talk a little bit about the history of the Columbines School of BS. We also chat about fire ecology, using a dichotomous key, herb lust, the importance of permits, and a whole lot more. And yeah, so I'm joined by Howie Brounstein, who founded the school, and this year marks the 40th year of Howie teaching. We're also joined by Leah Kays, who is his co-instructor, Alex Payne, who is also has been an instructor, but she does some admin stuff for them now, as well as Stephen Yeager, who is a former owner and former instructor at the Columbine School. Stephen's actually now the director of quality control at Mountain Rose Herbs, and he's a good friend as well. And be sure to stay tuned until the very end for some epic singing in a truly classic Columbines fashion. So big thanks to Howie, Leah, Alex, and Stephen for joining me on the show. Also, before we get into the show, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsors, and that is, of course, Oshala Farm. If you're looking to purchase high-quality, organically grown, U.S.-grown medicinal herbs, look no further than Oshala Farm at oshalafarm.com. They grow and sell over 80 medicinal plant species. They also have spice blends, tea blends, elixirs, fire cider, you name it, all grown right there in their beautiful Southern Oregon farm. So one more time, thank you to Oshala Farm for sponsoring the podcast. You can learn more about them at oshalafarm.com. And if you make a purchase, please tell them we sent you. Also, before we get into the show, big thanks to our Herb Rally Schoolhouse members. You know, we really could not do this without you. If you'd like to learn more about the Herb Rally Schoolhouse, simply head to herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And don't forget to use coupon code podcast at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. All right, that's going to do it for me today. Hope you enjoyed today's episode with the crew from the Columbines School of Botanical Studies. You're going to love this one. There's so many takeaways, and it's actually a full 2 hours this time around. So, all right, talk to you later. Bye.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Welcome back to a very special edition of the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm joined by the crew of the Columbines School of Botanical Studies, aka the Columbine School of BS. And they're actually celebrating their 40th year this year. So thanks y'all for making the time. Why don't we start things off and give brief intros, Stephen, brief intros. So Alex, why don't we start with you? Who are you and how are you involved with the Columbine School of Botanical Studies?
Ooh. Hi, I'm Alex Payne, and I am an herbalist. I actually went to school and studied with Howie and Stephen almost a decade ago and ended up on the Columbine staff. That's with a STAPH.
That's right.
And Mason's got that right there. Yeah, represent.
Staff.
I was been an administrator and helping out with the behind the scenes, lots of action that takes place just to make the classes happen. And now I'm also helping as an instructor in the field. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Howie, how are you involved with the Columbine School?
Me?
Yeah.
I started it. I started it back in '82.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm what is it? Founder and primary teacher of the Columbine School of Botanical Studies.
CEO?
I've done this 40 years.
Wow.
That's what's going on. It's the 40th time I've taught this class coming up this
Incredible.
year. Yeah, I can't believe it.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about that. All right, Leah Kays, can you introduce yourself as well? Yep.
Yeah, that's my name. Yeah, I studied with Columbines back in the mid-aughts. I did my first and second year. At that time, I did the desert class a couple of different times, spread out, and then also kind of spent time down there, sometimes showing up and just being on class a little bit. I spent time over the years, once in a while, subbing classes, and now for the past 2 years, this will be my third year teaching out in the field full time, which is really, really exciting. It's a dream and a labor of love. I'm really happy to be able to be doing it again. And yeah, as for the rest of my life, I pretty much just take any excuse to be outside as I possibly can.
Well, it sounds like you got the perfect gig for that then.
Exactly.
Steven, how about you?
First, I want to thank Mason for and Herb Rally for the opportunity to be here today and to participate here and be with all my pals and especially my mentor, Howie Brounstein. Uh, First took the class 1994. I'd moved to Oregon, Eugene from Philadelphia. Was here about half a year and discovered Howie's class. Took the class, changed my life. Started teaching in '97. Then became a co-owner sometime in the mid-aughts, and taught for over 20 years with Howie, and yeah, taught these two wonderful ladies here, Leah and Alex, and they became teachers, and it's yeah, now we're here.
Awesome.
We
Well,
taught Mason too.
I was gonna say, I was gonna say, a lot of the audience
Forgot
knows
about
that
Mason.
I went to the Columbines
Yeah.
School of Botanical Studies. I brought it up probably about every single podcast episode at this point. So yeah, I took a first year apprenticeship. I want to say 2011, if I'm getting that right. And I split that up, and then I took the second half in 2012, and then I took the second year apprenticeship in 2013. And yeah, at the time, Howie and Stephen were the primary teachers. So.
Yeah, I forgot you were the host. I didn't mean to admit you. I was just trying to.
No, 100%. No,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well,
Bringing those teachers. Yeah.
well, why don't we go down memory lane? I think it'd be really fun to kind of hear about the early years of the Columbine School of Botanical Studies. Howie, can you take us back to like year one?
Things were different back then.
Mm.
And herbalism was very different back then. You couldn't really go to like a store and buy chamomile tea at like a standard supermarket. So, and organics were kind of very, very kind of newish and hard to find most things. It was a very different time. And in fact, when I first started making tinctures, because I used to sell tinctures, it used to be the Columbines and Wizardry Herbs Inc. And I used to sell tinctures, and my friends would say, "You're not going to experiment with me by having me taste those tinctures." And it was very difficult to sell. There weren't that many people making herbal products, and it only like little herb stores would sell them. It wasn't really a good business to go into. And I also did teaching. And when I started this up, I was giving like a series of classes, which I gave for many years. It eventually turned into the herbal concepts class, but I do these like introductory classes on like calming herbs with nervines, and then another one on astringents, and another one on herbs for the lungs, and herbs alternatives, herbs for colds and flus, that kind of stuff. I give these like and then maybe a class on herbal preparations, like 4 or 6 classes on different kinds of herbs. And I wanted people to come out with me, and I would teach them how to identify and harvest plants. And that would be part of how part of the way I could get some herbs to sell, and people would get to keep what they needed. But at first it was a lot different because I didn't charge money. What I did was I traded people, having them pick herbs for me when we picked, in exchange for teaching them. And that was the first few years I didn't charge any money, and that was really didn't really work. It's like ideally, and in my young mind of wanting to give my stuff away for free, what I found is that if I didn't charge money, people didn't show up if it rained or if something else came up. And the first few classes that I ran didn't last that long because the weather would change and people just wouldn't show up. And so then I started charging a little bit of money, and it became better. But it slowly grew. It slowly grew and changed as the years went by. It became longer and longer of a class, and more got added to it, the same as the more I learned also. So I always had these lectures that I was teaching throughout the year, a variety of different things, and I was selling herbs, but I was also doing this field portion, which, like as I said, every year I'd start in like March or April in the beginning of the year. And at first it only lasted a month, and then it lasted a few months, and then it started lasting more and more. It really got developed way more fully after Stephen got involved. Although when Stephen first got in, it was already pretty developed, if I remember correctly. I don't know. When did you start, Stephen? Like the 90s? Was I teaching by myself at that point?
1994, I think you had a couple teachers you tried to teach. I won't mention any names, but yeah, a gentleman and a woman. Um, the class structure was very much set up, but then we started refining the curriculum. I think at that time we both decided to move from the Gilkey to the Hitchcock. We took that leap, which was a big change in the class.
Yeah.
To move to a more technical key. I think I kind of pushed you to do that, I would say, but I think you were going to do it maybe anyway, but we definitely pushed to move the class to more technical botany at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I remember.
the structure was set, to answer your question, the structure was set up, and then we moved into a refinement period when I moved in.
Oh yeah, that was it was really nice having Stephen with us. I remember one of the big decisions I made before Stephen was splitting up the class into a spring and summer session. And that worked out really good. That way people could complete the spring session, and if that's all they wanted, they could stop and have completed something and finished what they started, leaving feeling a good feeling. And I had changed the summer at some point to being a slightly different class and a different focus. In the spring, we focused mainly on like identifying, locating, tending plants, learning those skills with a little bit of harvesting. And then in the summer, the switch changed, and we looked at plants from a different angle. That's when we started looking at plants from more how they were used. In the spring, we'd keep a plant list about what blooming plants we saw based upon the families that they're in botanically. But in the summer, we keep a list of plants, whether they're blooming or not, by their uses. So we have this list of like food roots, food greens and pot herbs, food fruits, astringents, demulcents, nervines, the calming herbs, that kind of list. So we really changed the focus and made the summer a lot different. And that way it was more likely that people would continue because it wasn't just more of the same. It became kind of a slightly different class. But when Stephen came in, that was really cool because him and I started to get together around the campfire when it's just him and I in between classes, and we would do like 3-year plans. And we used to do a lot of 3-year plans, and all our 3-year plans came true. But Stephen really helped me develop a lot of the school as it is now, without question.
Mr. Yeager?
Should I not raise my hand? I don't know.
No, you go for it.
Kind of have to interject with that. Yeah.
You can interrupt me, Stephen.
I guess I just wanted to add the reason. Well, the course was split when I first took it. It was April to June, end of June, beginning of April, end of June. A couple weeks break, primarily because we needed to go to Country Fair to sell our tinctures at the Country Fair, and also because the mosquitoes were really bad in the mountains at that time. And Howie had learned that the first few weeks in July, you don't really want to be in the mountains because of the mosquitoes, and it also correlated with Country Fair. And then we'd start the summer, end of July, finish through the beginning of September. But I think what Howie, I just to add to what Howie was saying, what he was saying is that people could take the 4-month spring class, which was 12 field days every week in the woods, and then two lectures. Well, it was 1 lecture in the evening. It turned into 2 lectures in the evening every week, and people could bow out after the first term because our class was so unique. We would do 3-hour interviews. We do 3-hour interviews for the class just so they know kind of what they're getting into, because as all of you know, and as you know, Mason, is that you're going in the woods every week, all day, rain or shine, snow, sleet. And so it's very unlike, maybe there's classes now like this, but at the time there was no classes like this where you would mainly be in the field. And so that was the reason, some of the reasons why Howie would have these 2 terms is that after those 12 weeks, it was, you may decide that this might not be the right class for you. Even after a 3-hour interview, you might realize that this might not be the class for you. And so you would still get a chunk of curriculum. You'd still have a finality and learn a certain portion of herbal concepts and botany, but you could take a break, come back years later and do the summer, or just that was all you were going to do.
Yeah, it's a little less daunting. It's just there's a little bit less of a commitment can help some people make the decision too, I think.
I greatly benefited from that. Like I said, I split up the first year, and I was a new father at that moment in time. So it was really helpful for me to do the spring one year and then the summer the next. Just a quick break from the show to thank our presenting sponsor, Oshala Farm. Oshala Farm is a beautiful and vibrant certified organic herb farm based in Southern Oregon, where they grow and sell over 80 different plant species. The founders, Elise and Jeff Higley, have been longtime friends, so I highly trust their growing methods and ethics. You'll love the potency and vibrancy of all the herbs they have to offer. To learn more and purchase their herbs and other organic goods, head to oshalafarm.com. So thanks once again to Oshala Farm for sponsoring the Herbalist Hour. Now back to the show. Enjoy. Do y'all still do that 3-hour interview? Because I'll say that on the podcast sometimes, and I'll be like, was that actually real? Did I actually do a 3-hour interview? And I always tell people that I did. To this day, Howie, do you guys and Leah, do you still do 3-hour interviews?
Howie does.
I've been doing it myself. I did 3-hour interviews in the last 7 days.
Wow.
Or 8 days. Yeah. Yeah.
Those interviews are almost a gift of love. I mean, because we don't get paid for those. Many interviews never take the class. It was definitely, but doing those interviews increases the quality of the class because it increases the understanding of what the expectations are for the student and the teacher.
Yeah, the interviews are basically the students interviewing us more so than us interviewing the students. It's like 3 hours of us talking about course curriculum, teaching methods, and all the odds and end details about the class, extra equipment and stuff like that. And basically what it is transparency. We want to, as much as we can without going in the woods and doing it, we want to show people what they're going to get from the class and what they'd have to do to get it. And that's really important. We don't want people out in the woods after giving us, thousands of dollars to spend hundreds of hours with us and be like, oh, I thought I didn't know I'd have to do that. I want everybody to know about as best as possible what they would have to do and what they're going to do and what it's going to be like when they're out there. So that, it's interesting. And if people get up in the middle of the interview and say, I don't want to do this class, this is not for me, I made a mistake. I'm just like, yeah, this is a really good interview. We figured it out.
That's a success. Yeah, I feel like it's like most interviews, it's like reading the blurb of a book before you buy the book. But we do it in a way where you get to read like the first chapter or two and then make a decision.
Or it's like the Cliff Notes.
Yeah, the Cliff Notes.
Yeah, I always suggest when someone's trying to find a school or an instructor to study with that you can get a feel for being able to listen to them for hours on end or just enjoy what they're talking about because you're going to spend a lot of money and time with them. So it's important to know that it's a good fit for both parties.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I tell people to go to conferences. That's what when people go to conferences, because, it's nice and you kind of learn stuff, but, the classes are short, herbal conferences. Classes are short and it's unusual to get too much from a class. A lot of it is forgotten. But what I always figure is people should go to conferences and take classes from different teachers to find out which one has the style that they like, which teacher is most attuned that they can learn from the best. That's like nowadays you can just go on like YouTube, I guess. Or Herb Rally. You can go onto the Herb Rally channel and you can
Thanks for the plug.
So many different teachers because it's such a good asset for herbalism to be able to see this overview. That Herb Rally.
Amazing.
Yeah,
thank you.
All the teachers in the whole world on Herb Rally.
That's right.
Herbalist.com.
That's right. Awesome. Well, would you be willing to share some of the scenarios that you address in that 3-hour interview? Because I remember there was very specific circumstances that you would you be willing to do this in class or not do this? And I just think that's a fascinating topic. So,
well, it's a nice one.
Yeah.
So,
Willows and Alders.
What's that?
Heart-shaped rock.
Willows and alders. I can't believe it. I've been doing it by myself, so I don't do that joke anymore. I can't believe it.
I don't remember that one.
That's too bad.
You
could probably remember. You could probably remember how you just find yourself in the middle of the woods.
No,
And you're
I can
surrounded by these shrubs.
I can remember. Well, so let's say you're walking through the woods in class and you're off of any trail, right? You're completely off of any trail. And you're with us. We're actually on an elk trail. Let me get this together. So you're walking through the woods, it's in class, we're walking on an elk trail, we're far away from any other trail or anything. And all of a sudden there's an owl that flies below the tree line and it goes directly over your head and you look up and the owl looks in your eyes. I mean, you actually look into the eyes of the owl and then it calls out and flies off in this other direction. And there's something different about the forest there. It's like the trees are a different kind of tree, or maybe they're farther apart. And it seems as if the owl and it's calling, as if it's calling you to go walk over there because it's like glowing. The woods is glowing over there. So it's almost as if the owl looked in your eyes and is calling you in this direction. But we can't let you go off in that direction without another teacher, and because we're responsible for your well-being. And if you're on class with us, we can't let you just go off in the middle of nowhere. We can't lose you. It's, you're our responsibility until we get back to the cars and back to pavement. So would you be okay about not following the owl, but staying in class instead? Yeah. Do you remember that?
I 100% remember that. I remember being at the coffee shop. What's the next part?
What's the next part?
Oh, well.
Do you want to do it willows and
alders?
Let's say you're going to find, we got to do all the raps. We got to do all the jokes.
Should we just do a 3-hour interview?
Let's say, please, no, I just did 3 hours. So let's say that the plant that you want to harvest, or that we want to harvest, that you want to learn about, lives in a middle elevation, marshy mountain meadow. Alliteration is the spice of life.
Marshy mountain meadow.
Yes.
Middle elevation, marshy mountain meadow. I can do it 10 times.
Alliteration is the spice of life. Well, it's really hard to work with these meadows. It's hard to get in and out of them. It's hard to see how big they are even, because they're completely surrounded by a thick layer of trees and shrubs that lose their leaves in the winter.
Like willows and alders?
Yes, Stephen, like willows and alders.
That wasn't very good.
That was Stephen's part.
No, we need to practice a little more, Howie. We need to practice. Come on. Let's do it again.
Oh, well, wait a second. No, Stephen. What about what about Bob, who's here for the interview? They don't want to hear you do it again.
All right. Well,
that's how we used to do it. Remember, you'd go neatly surrounded by willows and all, but neatly surrounded. I go like willows and alders. Howie forgot the stick. It's okay. We can edit this part out.
No,
that's okay.
It's all staying in.
Remember, we used to do that. Remember, you go neatly surrounded.
Oh yeah. I was waiting for you to say. I was waiting for you to say. Howie, you act like you know what you're talking about. The student, you act like you're going to be a good student, and I act like I'm paying attention.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a good one.
And then I start like this. Okay, you ready? Neatly surrounded by a thick layer of trees and shrubs that lose their leaves in the winter.
You know, Howie, like alders and willows?
That's right, Stephen, like alders and willows. Man. What we're trying to do is
Stephen left. He can't handle it.
No, I usually leave at that part.
Oh, okay.
I would leave at that part, and then Howie would say, "Can you handle Muppet like
free to move around? It's like,
can you handle our dumb jokes?"
That's part of the interview. Can you handle the dumb jokes?
I say some dumb
There's
jokes.
There's actually a little interview sheet, and there's a check mark, and you put a check mark in the box. They laugh at the jokes.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
It's an important thing because they're going to be so much more.
They'll get really tired of those jokes if they don't enjoy them.
I check the box and then I say, "Oh, were you coached? Someone tell you to laugh at the joke so you can get into
I did forget that one line though, where I would say, "I'm going to pretend you're a good teacher, and they're a good student. Let's do this again."
Kimberly's laughing.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
God.
well, it's pretty interesting. The interview is really interesting. It's kind of designed so that if you can't handle it, if you can't handle what we're doing, if you don't like it, then you won't take the class. That's what we want. That's the whole thing. Is
That's a
that
success.
Yeah, that's success. If the person decides not to do it, that's a real success. If the person decides to do it, that's success too. But it's not like the standard interview where people come in and they're like they feel like they have to pass some kind of test and
Wow.
in the interview and then they'll be able to take it. Our bar is actually pretty low to get through, but you have to want to do it and you have to be able to, deal with our structure. The class is quite
Yeah.
structured.
Can they deal with us and the structure?
Yeah.
Do they have
That's really the bar.
do they have the money to pay for it?
Oh, that's
We
a good
did it
one
for a
too.
long time and made no money. And at
Yeah.
a certain point, we had to put our foot down and be like, well, no, you're. There was a lot of demand for the class at a certain point, and so we had to pick and choose. And money wasn't always the main. We offered many low payment plans, but you had to be able to pay it off in some way. You couldn't just. I mean, frankly, we did lose money on people a lot. We learned some lessons that people said they would pay us and they didn't, and at the time that was our only jobs. We had the tincture company, but I mean that was how we were making a living, and so that was important to us when we realized that we needed to. The interview was see if they could handle us, see if they could handle the structure, but also to see if they could pay for it. Frankly, and that's I think something you learn as a business person, and frankly, and it is a business what we were running. Yeah.
Well, and that's another point is like even to this day, getting paid is really important to me. But but I do make it really clear that I even say it, I say well, we offer a whole bunch of different ways to finance people, and that we'll really work with people to be able to help them pay. And I really don't want money to be like the one reason why they can't do this class is because of money. I don't want that, I want to help them through that if that's possible, make some way that it works. But I also want to get paid because I make a living this way. Does it? So we do a lot of different kinds of financial, and a lot of people, a number of people like to pay really small amounts like the year before and start making monthly payments like the year before. That's not uncommon nowadays.
Do you still have the Mason folder?
No, we don't have the
Oh.
Mason folder, but we still offer the Mason payment financial payment plan, which
So
is
pre-written checks.
well, we don't do that anymore. A lot of
Okay.
people don't even use checks, some people do, but it's all done by computers and online and automatic, and
Nice.
it just comes in on the certain date of the month. But yeah, the Mason folder, he wrote us pre-written checks of small amounts, just for years. For years, he just paid us this little small amount, and we can do that with a few people every year, and we do. It's
Yeah.
it's it's good. I want people
Sometimes
to be able to.
those students turn out to be, I don't want to judge it, but like they turn out to be very dedicated students, I'd say.
Yeah.
They make small increments of payments. They're very committed. They're under a certain budget, but they realize that this course is really important to their education and to their life. And so sometimes that's almost, it's a very gratifying as a teacher to teach those students. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely benefited from being able to make smaller payments for the time being. And well, earlier, Stephen, you mentioned I want to say you said like the Gill key or something like that. I never heard of that before, but I was kind of hoping we could go into talking about the Hitchcock and how you all use the dichotomous key as a teaching method. And Leah, if you want to start with that.
Oh, with the Hitchcock.
Yeah.
That is definitely, as Stephen introduced it, it's definitely one of the more unique things about not just Columbines compared to independent schools, but also compared to university these days. People who go in to get a botany degree often are not learning how to use the Hitchcock or really like study dichotomous keys in general. So it is, among other aspects of our botanical identification, it's sort of at the foundational level, one of the things that makes Columbine so unique, because it's not easy to learn. and it's a process, and it can be very, very difficult and frustrating at times, but we take it really slow. We're very patient. It's very hands-on. We're very like, we don't allow students to share their Hitchcock. So if you're like as we're going through and learning how to key out plants, you have to go through it on your own, because it's definitely, like so many things that we learn, it's definitely one of those things that you really, I just can't see getting it unless you're doing it hands-on on your own and working through the problems. Yeah, like Howie says, when we first introduce it, so the Hitchcock, we take the field Hitchcock is a pretty large.
Yeah, grab a copy.
This is the
There we go.
Hitchcock.
Nice.
So it's a pretty big book, and this is the travel one. This is the one you put in your backpack and take out in the field, because it's an abridged version of 5 of these that.
The Hitchcock's the author. It's the Flora of the Pacific Northwest. Just to be clear for everybody. Yeah.
You carry that book in the woods?
We call it the Hitchcock because it's kind of slang for us in the know.
Yeah, find that out. Celio Hitchcock.
Alex, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so a dichotomous key is a wonderful tool for botanists or people that want to go out in the field and ID plants. And we're kind of basing this on field characteristics. So we're looking at flower parts, leaf shapes, the habitat that they're growing, and things like that. And it really gives us the ability to be out in the field and actually figure out what plant we're working with or looking at or amongst. And it's kind of a dying art at this point in time. Like Leah mentioned, it's not being taught by very many people. I was lucky enough to be able to use the Flora of the Pacific Northwest in college, but not a whole lot of classes do that. So it's a wonderful tool that we specifically use in Columbines. And yes, we are hiking around with it, but we're able to identify different plant families, go into the genus and species of a plant. And it's also a challenge, in my opinion. That's something that kind of makes Columbines just such a fun type of learning atmosphere, is that it's challenging. And it's not something where you're being challenged like tests, you're having to study and cram in all this information. You're slowly gaining all of this information over time and building upon each concept, and it sticks with you. It goes into long-term knowledge, and not everyone might use a dichotomous key after they finish a class, but there are going to be those people that just attach on and they really enjoy it, and they go out in the field and they carry their IDs and wherever they go. So there's different dichotomous keys all over the United States. There's one for the Midwest. There's one for in the United States, the Pacific Northwest. So depending on where you live, you'll have to figure out which key is local to your area to ID plants.
I'm glad you brought up the challenging aspect of it, because I never really fancied myself a very sciencey type person. I was incredibly intimidated by keying out plants when I first started Columbines, but it really did build a bunch of confidence in me after taking the apprenticeship. Like, oh, I can do this now. And I really appreciated the challenge of it. And yeah, it was just very rewarding for me. So Howie, do you want to keep talking about the Hitchcock? Oh yeah, please, Leah. Yeah.
All right. Because it made me smile so hard. When you said, I'm glad that you brought up the challenge of it. That's the exact sentence I was going to say, and say that one of the most rewarding things that I experience as a teacher, and it is really it is specific to a lot of things, but definitely with the keying, almost every single student is just certain there's no way I'm going to get this. There's no way. And they tell you that, and they say it over and over and over. And one of my favorite things is after a few weeks, and then each week after that, saying, did you ever think you'd just know all this or know how to do all this? And it's just amazing to watch. It's truly beautiful. I mean, I experienced it 20 years ago, and now I get to watch it happen over and over again.
That's so cool.
Well, I think, yeah, I would say that when it comes to the dichotomous key, like so many things at Columbines, we could teach like the field characteristics of a plant, and we say, oh, the plant is this tall, it's this big. It grows in such and such a place. It's got purple petals. The petals are notched and there's hair on the stem. And we could say, well, there's a poison look-alike. It grows in the same place and everything, only it has rounded tip petals instead of notched, and there's no hair on the stem. We can memorize these things, and now you know the plant, and now you can safely, eat it if you want. You can identify the plant. But, if you learn 100 plants by field characteristics in that way, using just those and just memorizing them, 100 plants, you might have to learn, you might have to learn 300, memorize 300 or 500 things to know 100 plants. But if you want to learn the key, if you learn 50 big words, you can key out. I mean, you might be slow and you might have to look things up, but that's okay. We're still slow too, but depending on what we're keying out. It's just that if you know 50 big words, then you can work your way through it. The thing about learning to key is that once you learn how to key, you have this generalized knowledge. And instead of just knowing this plant in this one spot, you can now identify any plant in any place if you have the right key. So you have this generalized knowledge that's applicable anywhere. And that's exactly a theme that runs through Columbines. We're using local plants and local examples to teach a generalized knowledge, which is why the stuff that we teach is you can actually use it in Michigan or Belize or Southern Florida. You can use those same skills wherever you go. It's not like, oh, I only know Pacific Northwest now. We're consistently teaching that across the board in everything we teach. Oh, the other thing I was going to say about keying is that nowadays people have a tendency to be moving towards, botanists and scientists are moving more towards like using genetics for identification instead. And the whole concept of keying has a definite possibility of just disappearing. I have a feeling it's going to make it. I have a feeling people are still going to, but keying is becoming a lost art because I mean they still teach it at schools sometimes, as a class, but then you don't actually use it. You go into most botanists are going into genetics, and it's kind of going the way of like celestial navigation. Another thing I like to do, just because I like math and stars, and it's, if you use a GPS to get to Hawaii and your GPS is off on your boat, you don't know that until you get to Hawaii and it's not there. But they don't really teach celestial navigation anymore. That could be a lost skill, or physical assessment where people like take reflexes and doctors actually, touch you and then get information. Nowadays, that's getting lost. That skill's getting lost because we have all these tests and languages and songs of indigenous people just disappearing. This is the same kind of thing. There's a possibility of losing skills that we've had in the past, and king to me is along those lines.
Stephen, did you have anything to add to that?
I could go for another half hour on that.
Okay.
I tend to have a different viewpoint of it. I mean, keying might be falling out of, fashion because we're not going to places and needing to know figure out what plants are in those areas for economic reasons. But what Columbines teaches also is taxonomy, and taxonomy is the naming of plants. It's also a description of the plants, of the family, of the genus, of the species. It's a classification. It's knowing how plants are related to each other evolutionarily. And what Howie was describing is that DNA is now the gold standard for how plants are classified, where in the past it was solely based on mainly floral structure. Now it's a combination of DNA and floral structure. But as far as keying goes, yeah, it's becoming a lost art because there's very few who need to go out and key for economic reasons or for jobs. I mean, we Columbines teach keying, so because we're using plants to make medicine, or making tinctures or making preparations. So you want to make sure you have the right plant. And keying's a tool that you can use to determine if you have the correct species. So I think that I'm a little more conservative on the fact that keying is kind of dying. I don't know if it's necessarily dying, but it's just, is there a necessity for it in the general world? Maybe not as much. Yeah.
Thank you. So Kimberly's actually asking a question. Can't tell if it's related to keying yet, but let's see. So Kimberly asks, do you have any tips for learning more local botany and bioregional herbalism for the person who doesn't have access to an amazing school like yours in their region and can't travel? So whoever wants to take this one.
Well, botany you can learn at a community college, or if you just want to learn straightforward botany, I would look to your community college. It might have a botany class, or you could audit if you don't want to go to a university. But a university is going to have what's called a standard like 300 level or whatever 200 level botany class where they're going to teach you plant morphology. And I'm still pretty sure that any science-based school in your local area is going to have that. Herbalism, yeah, I'll leave that to Howie or Leah or Alex. Yeah.
Oh, Native Plant Society.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll learn about plants by interacting with other people, but it's not going to be as structured or as formal as maybe learning plants. Yeah.
Depending on where you live. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'll go for it. I was just saying the combination of those two would be, yeah.
Yeah. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and there's a renowned botanical gardens. There's certain botanical gardens in different cities. So maybe there's one close by. I know Denver, they do different classes. So anything kind of plant related, go look at the biology courses through your local colleges or universities. If they do have a native plant society, perhaps there is a group that you could get together and start keying out plants. And look for local ecology centers and see if any ecologists are working with plant guides as well.
Awesome.
Well, if you're looking for herbalism, I would look at Herb Rally. Because
Herbrally.com.
a big list of all the different classes and all the different schools and herbalism. You bet.
You can get a taste for different teachers and the way they teach about plants.
Mm-hmm.
So really good point, everybody.
Sour, sweet, unami.
To Alex's point on the botanical gardens is that even if you don't want to interact with other people, you can go to these gardens and they have plaques in front of the plants usually that have the common name, botanical name, family.
Dude,
you can go and just learn the names of at least start to learn the names of the plants because
and also
they have them named. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Volunteering at a botanic garden specifically. Because I know the Leach Botanic Garden here in Portland used to have, they had like it was kind of a daycare / class for kids. And I used to volunteer there to just like teach kids about basic things about plants, but really also using it as a tool to learn more myself. Because I still was had the mind of a kindergartner of botany. So it was perfect because I was on the same level as them and teaching and learning.
Yeah, I was going to say, do they have an adult daycare for plants?
That's what I do for my other job, Stephen.
So y'all keep plugging Herb Rally, which I really appreciate. And some of the listeners may not actually know, but we do list herbalism events, and we list them chronologically. You could search all events throughout the U.S. and the world, but we also list events by state. So potentially you could check out your state and see what herbalism events are happening in your neck of the woods. And there's a potential that there could be some botany classes there as well. And also, as Howie was alluding to, we also list schools. You could go to herbrally.com/schools, see if there's a school in your area. Lately we've also been listing online herbalism classes, and sometimes there's botany classes there as well. So you could go to herbrally.com/distance and find out what kind of online classes are being hosted. So just a little resource for you there. So along with keying out plants, another strong subjects that Columbines teaches is ecology. So I'm just kind of curious, Howie, why don't we start with you? What's the importance of teaching ecology to aspiring herbalists?
That's really interesting. You asked me about the interview, and there's a section that says that we teach forest ecology. And I keep thinking about how in the second year, we've really focused a lot more on forest ecology, and more so than the first year. And I kind of feel like, we don't teach that much forest ecology in the first year. And then I'm like, well, the concept of forest ecology is how all the pieces interact. And it's important in the first year to learn the pieces before you need to know the pieces before you can learn how the pieces interact. But then if I go back and look at what we teach in the first year, I realize we teach a lot of ecology. Yeah, we teach a lot about how the pieces interact. It's not just the plant by itself, but the plant is connected in all these different ways to the whole big picture, and so are we to some degree or another connected to this whole big picture. And I think it's really interesting because it's shifted a lot over time, where people would say, "Oh, all these fires are happening in the Pacific Northwest. This is going to make it so that you won't be able to teach. What if the fires come through your places?" And the answer to that is then we teach about fire ecology. Then we teach about how fire affects these areas, which is really interesting as it's become actually something we do all the time now
We've been
because a
doing
lot of
a
the
lot of
places.
that.
What's that?
But yeah, we've been doing a lot of that, and it's really great because people want to learn it because it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really important because a lot of people have fears about the fact that once a place burns, it will be gone forever. And there's different kinds of fires, and some of the places we go to have burnt in the past many times. A lot of the places that we go to are directly connected, involved with fire. So although things are, more extreme than they usually have been, and the fires have been larger, a lot of the areas are actually invigorated by the fire, and to be able to see things firsthand. And that's another thing about Columbines. Back in the day when people talked a lot about the old growth, they still do now, but it used to be very much on the forefront of old growth cutting, and a lot of it was being cut down when the logging in our areas were really extreme. You often hear some people saying, well, all the old growth trees are cut down. There's only like a handful left, and they're cutting them right now. We need to go. And then other people were saying, well, there's actually plenty of trees left. There's more trees after it's cut than before. And actually, there's plenty of trees. And it really depended on who their friends were and what media they were looking at. And what I really appreciated about Columbines was being able to take people to these areas and letting them see themselves that the truth is actually somewhere between those two. In our area, the truth is somewhere between those two extremes, and it's the same way with the fires, to be able to see how much of the fire actually damages, what kinds of fires there are. There's this kind of ecology that we're looking at now, and to be able to see how, what changes are there by this, and how this it does indeed go on, and how that goes on. It's very interesting, and I really that's another theme of Columbines. It's if I can get away with not telling someone what I believe, but instead showing them so that they can come to the same conclusion, that's a way better way of doing it. There are many times where I'm not going to answer a question because I'd rather people make the answers themselves by seeing it firsthand, rather than like just having to believe me or having to believe a teacher.
Great answer, Howie. Thank you. How about anyone else have anything to add to that?
I want to hear what Boots has to say.
Hi, Boots. Did anyone else want to talk about fire ecology, or how Columbines teaches ecology, or the importance of it?
Fire ecology?
Yeah.
I mean, we could give an example, I guess, is that there's a plant we teach called ceanothus, and very, very evolved with fire. Certain areas, the seeds won't even germinate. The seeds don't even germinate until there's a fire, because it requires a certain scarification on the seed based on the heat of the fire. And then those seeds can live in the ecosystem, for some of them been carbon dated over 100 years to be living in like old growth forest. And then when there's a fire, they germinate. And then for many years, what we learned, what I learned, and what we all learned in the Columbine school is that the ceanothus comes in after a fire. And then they would what we learned is that from Howie's experience is that they would try and chainsaw down all the ceanothus, because the fire would happen and all the ceanothus, or clear cut, which kind of is like a fire because they burn after the clear cut, all the ceanothus would come into the clear cut, and then the trees would start growing back. But they thought that the ceanothus was crowding out the trees, and that was preventing the trees from growing. But they would actually come and actually like chainsaw the ceanothus down, or they would even put you know, spray the ceanothus to kill the ceanothus with chemicals, and they would pay people to do this. And but what they've learned later is that the ceanothus roots they actually are actinorizal, meaning similar to how a legume fixes nitrogen in the soil. There's nodules on the roots that actually fix nitrogen in the soil, and so the ceanothus was actually preparing the soil so the trees could grow better. And that's a type of fire ecology. One aspect of fire ecology you might learn in Columbines. That's the kind of the thing that we're doing, is that we'll look at the ceanothus, as often as we can in different ecosystems, different ages of clear cuts, different natural burns, and you'll actually live that and see that through experience, how the ceanothus is actually preparing those areas for an old growth forest to come back.
I was thinking about being in the ceanothus. In fact, I was thinking about that one student that we had that one year, that years before taking the class with us, that's what they had been doing. Been out there with the ceanothus with chainsaws, cutting the chainsaws down. And now they're in class with us. Like,
that was their job. That was their job.
That was their job. And now they're sitting there gently taking just some branches of the ceanothus, trying not to hurt it.
Love the contrast. Leah, what were you going to say, Leah?
Overlapping experiences. I was gonna also mention a fire ecology thing that Howie touched on, that's specific to, the areas that we teach in primarily have some very, like Howie said, we teach in places that have fires that, maybe someone can tell, maybe they can't, that have happened a long, long time ago or a short time ago. But one of the main area where we teach had very recent fires. And so, as Howie said, we've been incorporating more fire ecology into just the regular week to week, day-to-day curriculum. And part of what that's really cool to do with the students is we go into these areas that when you're driving past them, they just look burned. It just looks scorched. People have really emotional responses to it, quite understandably. I do too. And then we get to take them in. And as Howie has said it, we get to show them the things that we've been saying actually happening. And even though it looks like this scorched earth, you go in and you see all those plants that you learned that come up in the very beginning of spring, they're all there. And that's just a really, really cool thing to be able to show people and experience firsthand, and possibly, obviously broaden the understanding and the perspective on fire and its role in the forests where we live.
Yeah, those low level fires, the low intensity fires, medium intensities that are in stand replacing, they don't burn all the trees down, but they seem to be, it seems like it's all lost. And to come back the next year and see all the ecosystem of plants still intact, to see that it's really not as big of a deal as it appeared in those instances is really amazing.
It's hard to see the lifespan of trees and forests as we relate it to our own, because ours is so much shorter.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Leah. You're right on the pulse of what I was going to say, is that when it comes to ecology, and it's kind of cool because I've been around a long time. It seems like for me, I've been watching these same places for decades.
About 400 years, right?
Was it 400 years? And Steven's been down a long time too.
I remember when you were in New Orleans, like back in the 1770s, 1746. Sorry.
Yeah, I love the 60s, the 1860s. I mean, so the thing that's really apparent to me, because I struggle with it, is that cycles that are longer than our personal human life are really difficult for humans to wrap their heads around. And a lot of what's going on around us are cycles that are way longer than our lifetime. But if you know what to look for, you can see them. And if we start talking about like ecology of the earth around us, those things are important to try to wrap our heads around to get an understanding. And we've really expanded ecology, especially in the second year of Columbines, where we start one of the goals of the second year is the first year we're primarily staying in the west side of the Cascades, but in the second year we go to different ecosystems around Oregon, and to be able to come to a new ecosystem and to be able to understand what environmental factors are important within that ecosystem, whether it's, moisture or light or elevation, or some systems, fire is really important. It needs to be coming through on a regular basis. It depends on where you are and what system you're looking at, but to recognize those major formative forces on the ecosystem and then use that to be able to figure out where the plants grow. That's the kind of thing we actually teach in the second year.
Just going back to like my memories of class, I remember being on a field trip and learning about fireweed. That's one of the first plants that's coming to mind when you're talking about this. And Stephen and Howie used to always say, and you probably still say this, repetition is the key to mastery. And for whatever reason, the Latin name epilobium just popped in my brain, and I probably haven't said that word in years. Did I get that right? Is fireweed epilobium?
You got it right, but they changed it.
The name changed. It's
shit.
Charlemagnon.
You got it right.
You got it right.
You got it right, but they changed it.
Synonym. You got it right.
The names were
Let's do
changed.
this over. Mason, yes, you got that right, but did you know
You got
it's
it right,
changed?
Mason.
Thank you, Alex.
Some young whippersnapper is going to say that the name's changed.
The names have changed to protect the innocent, but the plant's the same. I spoke to a student that took the class 30 years ago, a few weeks ago.
Wow.
I took the class 30 years ago, and she was just telling me about someplace she was hiking, and she said, yeah, and I got to the top of the hill, and it was different ecosystem than I expected. It was all lava and Kinnickinnick and Pipsissewa, and I think we used to call that the Hudsonian zone. I'm like, 30 years later, she still got it right. And she even started ripping off some Latin names of things that she probably hasn't said in years without even thinking. And it's like, repetition is the key to mastery. We do teach through repetition. The first time I'll tell you the name of a plant, I might say the Latin name. I might say, well, that's Dichotomous vermosa. And you'd be like, what did Howie say? Sounds like he has his hands in his mouth again. But the 40th time that Leah asks you what the name of that plant is, you'll have it for the rest of your life.
No way, Howie. I don't believe it. You mean to tell me I'm going to remember all these things that you tell me on the first class? You think I'm just going to remember those forever?
Well, I already forgot what the new Latin name for fireweed is, so I guess I need to repeat that a few more times. But Howie, can you speak to how Columbines teaches plant location?
So if you were gonna learn plant keying through like a real science school rather than like the Columbine School of BS, that's botanical studies. You go into the woods and they would say, okay, we're going to key this plant out. And then everyone would go out and start picking the plant, and they'd go and sit down under a tree or maybe take it back to the lab. But at Columbines, we want you to sit where the plant grows. And people say to us, well, people just say to us, well, why can't I just pick the plant and sit under the tree? The plant's growing in a sunny space, a sunny place, where it's all rocky, and under this tree is soft and shady and it's mossy. And why can't I just key it out here? But the thing is that we're teaching plant locating. So what we want to do is teach you not like how to just read it in a book. Oh, it grows here. Or a lot of times what teachers will do is bring people to their stands of plants and say, here's where it is. Now go find your own. Now you know where it grows. But most people can't do that. Just because they see the plant out in the wild, they can't find more of it necessarily. And that's what we're trying to teach. How do you know from the plants themselves, from looking at hidden cues? People say to me, well, do you teach talking to plants? People want to be able to talk to plants. And I remember Stephen always used to say, plants talk to me, but they don't speak in English. But by looking at what the plants are essentially telling you by how they grow in the wild, you can learn what it is about them that that they like, what it is that makes them shine. What is it? The amount of water? Is it the amount of sunlight? Is it the kind of soil? Is it there was a fire just recently? There are things that you can get by looking at them and by learning from the earth and from the plants themselves to be able to know where to find more plants. And so that's why we want you to go sit where the plant is when we look at the plant. It's very important to us. We're really thinking when we show you a plant for the first time, we're absolutely thinking about, is this a place that the plant usually grows? We want you to see a plant and sit with it where you're most likely to find it. So yeah, I mean, you do have to go sit in this, and we're not trying to be jerks. We don't want you to sit in the sunniest, hottest spot where it's really and uncomfortable. I mean, we want you to sit in the place that's, the shadiest and the most comfortable of the rocky places. But by sitting there with the plant for that time that you're keying it out, by going there, you get the feel of the rocks on your butt and the way it feels on your shoes when you're walking, and the sunlight and the smells. You may not even paying attention to any of that. But then months later, when you're walking around and you smell a certain thing, and you feel the rocks under your feet and the sunlight in a certain way, you're like, "Oh, does that plant grow here?" It's just important for us to teach locating, because it's extremely important. It's one of our number one goals in the stuff that we teach, because it protects our places. I mean, we go back to these same places for decades in some instances, and if all our old students came back, and there would be a big impact. So having people being able to find their own plants is of major import to us, because if you teach a person how to, if you give a person a fish, right, then they're not hungry for that day. But if you teach them how to fish, then they're not hungry the rest of their lives. And if they teach everyone around how to fish, there's no hunger in their communities. And then if you sell your fish because it's the best fish for everybody in the world, then a few people get really wealthy, and then there's no fish, and then everyone's hungry again. So it's important to stop along that path somewhere.
Absolutely.
Are we getting sushi after this?
What did you say?
We're
Sushi.
getting sushi. Locating.
Did anyone have anything to add to that?
I
Stephen?
mean, I could tell more stories, I guess.
I would love to hear it.
Well, when we're locating in Columbines, is that, to just add to Howie, is that we're going, like, for example, with valerian, we go out to where the valerian isn't even out of the ground yet in the spring, and then we go the next week, and the valerian's first coming out, just a little bit of leaves. Then we go out again, and it's getting bigger, and then it starts to flower, and then it starts to get covered by other plants because the valerian stays low. And then in the fall, when we finally harvest the valerian roots, because that's when you harvest roots, we had watched the plant throughout the year when it wasn't even blooming yet, or not even out of the ground yet, so it's dying back, and we're harvesting the roots. And that's part of plant locating as well, is learning. Columbines teaches you a few plants, and that's important. Not a few, about 20, but we teach you about 20 plants really well in that same model. So then you have that model to learn from other plants. And that's a big thing that Columbines does, is we're not just teaching you about the valerian or whatever plant we're teaching about, we're teaching you how to learn from the plants.
Yeah, that's really true. The skill that you get is to be able to, in your area, get the information that we teach about your plants or about new plants. The skill applies to outside of the class setting and without teachers. You'll still be able to identify, locate, harvest, use, process plants.
Yeah, I can really attest to that. I had all of my education and schooling in the Pacific Northwest, and then moved back to the Midwest, just kind of like Mason.
Yep.
And once you come to a new region, you see your familiar friends. And I'll give you an example. We have pedicularis growing here. It's Pedicularis canadensis. And I knew it was a pedicularis as soon as I saw it. I might not have known the species, but because of my experience of being out in the woods with Columbines, I had other particular species that I was familiar with. And you kind of gain a sense of these familiar characteristics, where they like to grow. and all of a sudden you're in a totally different place in a different region, somewhat different habitat, and you're finding your familiar friends. And that's a very helpful background knowledge, I think, foundational knowledge that you gain through the Columbine school. It's applied everywhere you go.
Absolutely. Yeah, I recognize a lot of the plants around here. They might be different species, but I'm still trying to learn. But yeah, the stuff that I learned at Columbines has been invaluable. Leah, did you have anything to add to that?
I don't know. I don't know if I have anything else to add, but I definitely agree. I can remember even when I was checking out the school 20 years ago to learn from it. I remember even then, like that was the most important thing to me, that to understand that I'm not just learning the plants here in depth, which we do as teachers at Columbines. That's what we do. You learn some plants in depth, like Stephen said. But the locating and so many other aspects of what and how we teach, it's really true. It's a really important part of the school and what we teach, and the curriculum that folks have put together over the years that Howie and Stephen have built it's proven it works. People go all over the world with this knowledge and build their own understanding in new places.
This is exactly the stuff. This is exactly one of the reasons why I recommend folks actually take an in-person apprenticeship, learning in the woods or in the garden, because you can only learn so much online, through herbalist.com. But does anyone have any rants about like taking online school versus in-person school? I just always recommend, folks like balance it out, get some books, take some online courses, but eventually you're going to want to go to some sort of plant walk in person or in-person apprenticeship.
I don't think there's any comparison of learning in person. Just like we were saying, there's this association that you gain when you touch the plant, when you feel it, when you get its scent, when you smell the trees around you. You learn a lot more. Not to say that you can't learn things online. It's absolutely, you can start getting some foundational knowledge online. But when you're in person with someone, you can ask questions. You're there. You're actually working directly with the plant, and it's a different experience. Not to say you can't learn online, but there is something about in-person learning, and especially when you're working with preparations and things like that. You can watch a quick video, but when you're actually doing it, there's going to be mishaps. There's going to be a little bit of differences, and you want that guidance or that knowledge to be able to ask questions.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
I agree with that. Although I don't know that I've done any online schooling, so I can't honestly compare it. But I can't imagine learning what we learn and what we teach through Columbines without being hands-on. That's kind of our whole shtick. But yeah, being out there, and like Stephen was saying with the valerian and Howie with plant locating, like there are subconscious notes even that you're picking up on, and that year-round vision of the valerian and other plants, learning that, if you're looking at a plant online or, just seeing it, you're most likely looking at it in one state. Yeah. And part of not only seeing the plants in person, even in that state that you want to see it in, or you're seeing it in a couple of states maybe, but yeah, just being out there and experiencing what the whole world feels like around it and what that looks like from the time it's, just coming out of the earth until it's dying back, like all of that. I can't imagine how you could get the fullness of that through online. But, we balance our field teaching with, you can do the lectures online and things like that. So I think that's kind of what Mason was saying. Having a balance of the two at the very least makes sense.
Absolutely.
I've noticed in recent times, sorry, just to interrupt.
Please.
In recent times, we have this new culture of Zoom and online recordings and online classes. And it's very easy to kind of get into this mindset of like you're collecting books where you pay for the webinar, you have the recording saved, and then, never go back and watch it. And so it's really easy to accumulate all these books that are great. We have them for later. But I do really like these kind of webinars where you actually show up and you're there during the live performance or the live class, because you're taking that time to show up. That's dedication. That's showing that you really want to be there. You're supporting the teachers. I think that's really important nowadays, that we remember that to show up for the instructors, to be there. They're putting a lot of effort into these conferences, these workshops, these webinars, all these kind of things. And so it's important to be there. Show them that you like this material. You're not just kind of putting it on your like recording library list or later and never get to it.
That's a great point.
Well, I think there's a
okay. Good, you go first, Howie.
oh, thanks. There's a couple things. One is the field work that we talk about at Columbines. There's no way that we could ever teach that online or in person in a school. That has to be in the woods. It has to be out. You have to be actively where that's going on. The skills we teach are not translatable through words. They're only through actions and experiences. And it's running through people through the experiences that make this happen. However, and that's what's one of the things that's unique about Columbines and about, being out there in the woods for all that time, being out there in the earth, directly seeing and watching and touching those plants and feeling the earth around you. And that makes it all happen. But when it comes to lectures, and it's always good to have like kind of lectures, because there are certain things you can do in lectures, like take notes in a comfortable place where it's not raining. We repeat so much that we actually tell students not to take notes in the field. In the field is a time to be with the teachers in the earth, but then we have these lectures. We're repeating everything, so we can repeat it again where people can write it down on a piece of paper. That's great. But I really, really notice a big difference between Zoom online classes and in-person classes, and I miss the in-person classes. I do still teach them. Every lecture we teach, it has an in-person option. I prefer that people came. I'm really happy a lot of people are taking our classes from farther away that wouldn't have access to it because of Zoom and online options. But it's really different. When we first started doing online and we had students that used to be in class and they started going online, they would sit down, they'd be in quiet places, they'd be taking notes, they'd be looking at me, and I'd be able to dance around and they'd be, whatever. But then as time went on, there's a lot more people that are showing up, and if I was just given a one-off lecture class where like, separate and someone is signing, it's online and someone's signing up and they're paying me and it's just one class. And if they want to show up like and keep muted and their video off and who knows what they're doing or even paying attention and they're getting a recording, that's fine. But if you're taking this apprenticeship, yeah, if you want to actually be there and learn the information, I want it to be like a class, like Alex was saying. And it's really difficult when people are like, vacuuming and just have it on in the back or cooking, or maybe they're driving or at a coffee shop or at a party. Sometimes they're at a party and there's like loud music in the background and they're like talking to people and stuff, but the video's on and occasionally they come and ask a question that we've already discussed. So I had to kind of deal with like what's really going on here, and is this the same kind of learning? The way I kind of dealt with it is certificates. If someone comes and takes a class by Zoom, I'll give them a certificate that says it's a Zoom certificate because I really can't tell how much they learned anymore. However, if people show up to the Zoom class and they treat it in the same way as if it was a real class and they really pay attention and learn and participate, then I can, it's my choice. I can give them as if they were in person, because it depends on people. The right kind of person, if they have a recording and they come in and they take the class and they have the recording, some people can use that to learn way more than they could. Some people, I'm really amazed at how much you can learn if you take it seriously and make an effort to do online learning. So it's really like how people learn and how people learn. Some people can't learn that way. Some people can't learn sitting in a classroom and taking tests. And that's kind of what makes our class different, is that we don't give tests, or maybe we test way more than anybody else because we ask you over and over again. Oops, I forgot what I'm talking about. Switch it over to Stephen.
Yeah, Stephen, what were you going to say?
Oh, geez. Is this a 4-hour class or what is this?
2 hours.
Well, yeah, I got to give my 2 cents, right? I think there's a lot to digest there. I agree with everything that's been said. I think if I could summarize a lot of what's been said is that if you're going to be a student, you probably should remain professional. You should commit and you should show up and you should participate. Not everyone's going to be not going in the field and sitting with the plants and learning about the plants. Don't get me wrong. I think that's the best way, but that's not for everybody. Everyone's not, and some people aren't going to learn well from that situation. Not to say you should not take the Columbine School of Botanical Studies, because I think you should, but we all learn in different ways. My recommendation, and that I mean, I take a lot of professional classes for my other world, my other job, and my other life.
Who do you work for?
Mountain Reserves.
Oh yeah.
And then it's just, taking a class where you have access to the teacher, where you can actually like engage the teacher even during the class or after the class, where you can engage your fellow students, or you're in breakout rooms, or you're digesting some of the content and then working with your fellow students to digest that content. To me, that's what I would look for if I was a younger herbal student at that point. Knowing what I know now, I would seek a class where I have access to the teacher, and I also have access to my fellow classmates, and then to be able to ask questions and engage. I think that you'll get a lot more learning from that. And Columbines does that to a large degree as well. So that's a similar model, just in person versus online. I would not suggest that anything is a better model at this point, because this is a brave new world with online and in person, and there's pros and cons to having both. We can't expect everyone to fly to Eugene and take this class, but so there's some compromises, and we all want to. The bottom line is really we all want to. I think we all want to engage people on how to bring plants into their lives and use them as food, medicine, for their friends and family, and maybe more. And so
those are all.
Yeah,
Go for it, please.
For someone that is looking just for some added information to kind of share with their family, loved ones, community, then herbrally.com and their YouTube channel has all of these one-off recordings and videos from tons of teachers that you can even, get familiar with and see if you're interested in learning from them. herbrally.com.
I love it. I guess I did want to
Let's not forget the Herb Rally bobbleheads.
That's right.
It's only $10 a month.
That's right. Herbalife.com/schoolhouse. I did want to add a couple more things to this conversation. And Stephen, I like all your points about there's pros and cons to both. But as far as like the pros of being in person, taking an apprenticeship, I remember when I first started Columbines, I want to say during that 3-hour interview, I don't think you necessarily say that Columbines is a particularly like plant spirit or spiritual type experience. Although I will say, after spending, countless hours in the old growth forest and Western Cascades, you almost do end up having a bit of a spiritual experience of sorts, just by default. You can't help but not have that. So that's hard to do when you're taking online classes. And then the other added thing that you get from taking an in-person apprenticeship is, I know you could build friendships and community via Zoom and online breakout rooms and stuff like that, but you really do end up developing really close bonds with your fellow students and the teachers when you're out there in the woods as well. So I would just say, the spiritual aspect, and then help building community, definitely bonuses for in-person apprenticeships. So sweet. Well,
can I touch on the spiritual part real quick? Because I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
So like we've been very particular about not like it's hard. This is a hard one a little bit, that to not like present a certain what our spirituality is on the plants and the ecosystems, but just kind of allowing that to happen, creating the vessel or the space for that to happen. Because there's no denying that that's going to happen when you're, right. And that's something you're not probably going to get from a webinar or a video. Maybe if there's some kind of presenter who's doing some kind of video, perhaps that's possible. But that's something that you're not going to get by not sitting with the earth and the plants, and that spirituality just naturally happens. And that, Howie and I could take credit for that happening, but no, that's the earth and the plants making that happen. And then we're just allowing that space to be open, and then allowing people to speak about it, to do the science around it, and just allow that to happen in a safe space. So I'm glad you touched on that, because yeah, that's one thing that might be very unique, or is very unique about Columbines, is it allows that spiritual, whatever you want to call it, space to happen, because our classroom is the earth.
I love it.
Stephen, will you say that thing that you used to say during the interviews about like watching television when you were looking through the window as a kid and what you got from Columbines?
Watching television, looking through the window. I'm getting old.
You
Watching
used,
television.
you used to travel on vacation with your parents and look through the window at
Oh, let me see if I can do that. Wow, it's been a while. You were bringing. I haven't did this. We call it a wrap, not a stick, by the way. Yeah, it's a wrap.
Not a spiel.
Not a shtick.
What was it? No, it's more of a wrap.
You used to like look and you used
Yeah.
to watch the
Oh yeah, when
woods.
I used to go out to like the places with my family. We'd go to the mountains, we'd go to the beach. We'd get up there and be like, "Oh, look at the scenery.
Right.
Oh, it's pretty. It's beautiful. Oh, I'm here. It's there. Look at that. The scenery. It's so beautiful." But after taking Columbines, it's not just scenery. You're like living the scene. You are the scenery. You're like interacting with the plants. You're part of it. It's not scenery. You're not just going to a destination to look at things. You're living it. And yeah, and that there's a different beauty in looking at something and being, oh, that's so beautiful. It's almost like just looking at a picture. But when you start living it, you're like in the beauty. Is that right, Howie?
Mm-hmm.
So good.
That's what it was.
The journey is the destination.
Yeah, I forgot about that one.
That's one of our the things that, like, if you look at some of the things that we teach at Columbines that are our goals, one of the things that we do is help our students define their relationship with nature by being in nature.
Mm-hmm. It's one thing I really
Can't
appreciate
really get that
about
from an online
everything.
class. Sorry. Yeah. Yep. Sorry,
Yeah.
Leah. Yeah.
Oh no, you're fine. Yeah, I was just gonna say that I've always appreciated that too, and very specifically the aspect that we're not attempting to mute anybody's spirituality, but we're just not attempting to mold anything or show it. That's all stuff that people will, and everybody will reach something different and have a different feeling, or maybe it will take them longer and it will happen later. But it like Stephen said, we create the space. We create the space, but we're not teaching spirituality.
And we're barely creating a space. We're just bringing them there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we're not really. Yeah,
a little bit.
true.
We're not even creating the space.
We're not even creating it. Yeah.
We're
giving
guiding
access
to a certain degree, guiding a certain degree through the science and the botany and the herbalism. But yeah, the space is created, and we're privileged to be able to use that space to teach what we're teaching. Yeah.
We're giving them a map, showing them access, giving access to the space.
So transitioning a little bit, how I know you've got a wrap on this. Can you define what herbalist is?
Herbalist?
Yeah.
Herbalist is it's a lust for plants. It's I love these plants. I want them around me. I want more. I want more. I want to gather. I want to gather. Suddenly you start gathering and you're gathering more than you need. Suddenly you go out there, you start picking and picking and picking and picking and picking, and suddenly it's like dark and you're cold and you can't find your way back to the car because you picked way more than it's slamming on the brakes, jumping out of the car and going, "There's some more," and running out to pick it, even though your trunk is full of the herb now and you just can't stop. And it's interesting because back in the days when I was teaching with Michael Moore back in was that the 90s or something, and he used to say, this is what binds us as herbalists. This is what makes us all the same. This is what brings us together, is the fact that we love herbs so much. We want them around us. It was a different time, a different place. It's like, oh, we love these herbs, let's gather them, and And he always used to smile at people with Herbalist. But for me now, it's like a whole different thing. We actually teach a lot about Herbalist, maybe not in those names, but we teach a lot in the fact that how would I put it? We spend a lot of time not harvesting plants, and we actually have different techniques of like becoming really conscious about not gathering, like not we go most of the times we go out, we don't take anything, and it's a space where we don't take in general, and that's an important skill to learn. Um, uh, it's really easy to harvest plants and it's really difficult to not harvest. But if you can learn the skill of not harvesting, then you can you'll become a much more powerful wildcrafter, and you'll make better decisions both for the earth and for you. So by teaching people, we teach people that there's plenty of time and plenty of herbs. That's also really unique about Columbine students. Columbine students are pretty quick to say, it's easy for them to say, oh, I won't pick. It's okay. We won't gather. And we now have the skill to be able to gather, but we don't necessarily need to gather it today. Or if the population isn't quite right, if there's something about it, we can always find more. And that's a really positive attitude. I'm sure other people can say stuff.
I guess I have to, and then but if you all want to go first, but it's very natural to want to have all the plants.
Mm-hmm.
Like you start collecting them like baseball cards. It's like I got Michael's Moore book. I need to get the Devil's Claw, the Devil's Club. I mean the Devil's Club, the Inside Out Flower, the Vanilla Leaf, the Black Cohosh. I need to get everyone in this book. But then when you start, that's natural. That's a really normal thing for beginning herbalists to want to do, and that's no fault necessarily. And that's one way you might learn about plants. But then a lot of herbalists that keep on going. So some of those herbalists will just collect all the plants and then they'll be into like something else, like
Crystals,
rocks or crystals at that point. But the ones that continue on and keep learning about plants, they realize, well, there's about 10, 20 plants that I use on a regular basis. Like I still go and just collect the same 10, 15 plants every year or every 2 years or when I need them, and then have my tinctures in my closet and I use those for pretty much everything I need.
Yeah, I mean, I think in our culture and society, we have this need for things. I need this. We can get on our phone and hit a button, and the next day or within an hour, something's delivered to us. So we have this idea that we deserve it. It's ours. And sometimes people tend to look at plants like that as well. I can even see it in myself sometimes in the garden with the plants that I grow. This can be applied to even going to the grocery store, not just gathering plants or food out in the wild, but we don't necessarily think how long is it going to take to make this meal, or how long. I just went and bought, a pound of herb and I want to make a tincture. How long will that take? And sometimes we don't have that time. Time is very precious. And that's something we really have to think about when we go out into the woods and gather plants from their native habitat. We don't want to just run out there and grab the first thing we see. We want to develop a relationship with that land, with the habitat, and we want to make sure that we have enough time, if we are choosing to perhaps harvest, that we would be able to process that plant, because it's really easy to pick, but processing generally takes a lot more time, and we wouldn't want to waste any kind of plant material. So that's something that we have to really. It's a skill that's gained as you experience it. You have to kind of get out there and pick too much to know what that feels like. But if you're working with herbalists that have that experience and can help you just kind of make those, to be aware of that, it really helps with that process, I think.
Mm-hmm. We can recreate the days where you go out and harvest too much, but then you'll be there with the school and the teachers and other students to help get through it. I don't think I have anything to add to the concept of herbalist. I think everybody's described it perfectly. I think I was just thinking about what Howie said about how our students, one unique thing about our students is that they will choose not to pick quite regularly. And sometimes we'll be on whole classes where there will be a student who doesn't pick a couple of times, and it doesn't break their hearts the way that it would to someone who hasn't learned more about Herbalist and experienced that it's okay to wait. It's actually way better to wait for all sorts of reasons. But that's one of those, I just wanted to mention that too, because that's another one of those like lovely feelings as a teacher when we have a student that chooses not to pick, and you can tell they're choosing not to pick because they can just tell they're not in the right space for it, or maybe they just don't need it, or they feel like they won't actually use it. It makes us feel so like we've done a great job as teachers, because as Stephen said, it's very natural to want the plants and to want all of them and to want lots of them. Like that's a very natural, normal thing. So it's really, really wonderful to see someone have the skill to actually observe that skill and practice the skill of not picking.
I'm going to add one more. I
Yeah.
think those are really good points by Alex and Leah. Well, of course, Howie, he always makes good points, except that one time. But I would just translate it also to buying herbs. As Alex said, you can buy herbs and get them overnight delivered. You don't necessarily need the 5 pounds, the 1 pounds. If you're working with a new herb, and buy the smallest amount.
Mm.
I mean, I work for Mountain Rose Herbs. We want you to buy the largest amount, I guess, but not really. No, buy the smallest amount. You don't buy a pound and use 2 ounces and throw away the rest. Hopefully you compost it, but yeah, just start with a small amount. You don't need to buy the largest amount. Start with an ounce of tincture. Is it really what you're gonna use? So it translates not only to the farm, your garden, or the wild harvesting, and also be a smart consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just buy frivolously. Buy maybe get to learn to know the herb before you're buying the bulk amount.
Good point.
Oh yeah, I meant to say when I was saying the other point that when we were back on a different topic, Howie plant locating. Howie mentioned how, that's one of the reasons why we can take students back to the same stands year after year, and it's not decimated. In fact, it's healthy and it's well cared for because we teach our students that herbalist is another piece of that puzzle, that learning not to have that herbalist and to respect the spaces, respect the stands and the balance in the ecosystem and all of that. That's another reason that we can take students back to the same places year after year after year for 40 years.
40 years.
40 years, Columbine School of Botanical Studies.
Happy anniversary.
That's right. I can't hardly believe it. I can't hardly believe I'm 40 years old plus.
You're at least 40.
You're finally 40.
I mean, let's check it out. If you put all our skills together of all our people, it's like 100 years of experience here between me and Steven.
Over 100.
You add all our experiences
200.
Together.
Yeah, over 200.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
250.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel more like I do now when I started learning from you, Howie.
Oh, I'm so glad. That's what we had hoped. Except that one time.
Yeah.
That's what I learned from you. Except that one time. I still say that. Except that one time. Except that one
There's always
person.
that one time.
Yeah.
This happens. Yeah. There's no absolutes.
You know what we're doing for the 40th year? That's kind of interesting. We're going to have alumni classes. We're offering like 12 alumni classes.
Oh.
We have a season pass where you can do all 12 alumni classes. So
Really?
all old students from all the years can just pick one or can come in and do the whole
I
series.
wasn't invited.
I'm really
Yes, you
excited
are.
about it.
Steven, you're always invited. Yeah.
Steven and Alex might show up for this. It'll be great. Or one of those classes.
We got
Oh,
the
man, that'll be
kids'
fun.
head.
Send me the schedule. Talk to my people.
Yeah, we'll talk to your people.
It's going to be really cool. It's a really unique thing we're doing for our 40th anniversary at Columbine School of BS.
We haven't said the
Period.
website yet. It's botanicalstudies.net.
That's right. And you can sign up, as Howie said, you can get a season pass for all the alumni classes, or you can do them individually.
Will you do stuff like this?
What could I see?
Stringent.
No. Rose AC.
This would be ranunculus.
Rose AC. Sorry. What?
You and I just did a dance.
When you come across a yellow flower in the meadow And then you got to figure out whether it's a ranunc or whether it's a buttercup or ranunculaceae family or whether it's a rose family. That's part of the learning process. So that's the right wrong answer, Steve.
Yes.
And for those just listening on audio, if you check this out on YouTube, you can see a bunch of fun little botanical dances that all these what do you got? 5 guests here today? Jeez, no, 4. Yeah, so we're doing botanical dances here on the YouTube channel. Awesome. Well, why don't we transition a little bit? We were going to talk about permits and the importance of obtaining permits. Leah, would you want to talk about the importance of obtaining permits?
Oh yeah, the importance of obtaining permits. You got to get your permits. What's that, Stephen?
I said regulatory. Here we go.
Oh, you love this stuff.
Yeah, it's very important to have permits. There's if I think there are different types of permits that we teach in class. You'll learn as you go through the class, but basically that is, the obvious stuff, getting permits from whatever land you're on, whether that's Forest Service, or different types of privately owned land. If it is, I know that there are apps now, people have access to find all these like private lands where they might want to fish or gather plants or do things. So you can see that something is private land. Well, you're going to want to contact that property owner or the Forest Service, depending on who it is. There's the permit or permission of if somebody takes you to a stand or takes you to some herbs and shows you where things are, you want to make sure that you don't go back to those places without their permission. And then, as you learn spending time with the plants and with the earth, you're ultimately also looking for permits and permission from the earth and yourself. That's my quick wrap.
What's your wrap, Stephen?
I have nothing to add to that. I think, perfect. It really depends on what you're doing. If you're doing large commercial harvesting, you obviously should go get permits. Permission, really important. And yeah, permission from the plants. I think Leah summed it up pretty absolutely well. There's nothing really to add. You do need to know your local laws and jurisdictions, and know what plants are illegal to pick.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Know what's sensitive or threatened or you shouldn't be picking, and do that research for sure before you even go out there.
Well, I know Howie has a big stick because permits are there's a lot of rumors that go around, one, about Columbines and not having permits, which is inaccurate because we do have permits. But Howie was actually a big foundational piece of putting together these personal use Forest Service permits for collecting things out in the woods. And I'm sure, Howie, you want to talk about that, but it's really, I find it very amazing that Howie put in this energy and effort to allow us to show to the Forest Service and other larger entities the amount of people that want to go out and harvest plants. And then that will also allow us to know if there needs to be regulations or, more access to these things. It's allowing people to know the overall interest, I think. But yeah, let's let Howie talk about how he's been a foundational piece in creating these.
Oh, wow. Do I have to go back to that? Like, I think there's on one hand, people will say, well, the government can tell me what I can and can't pick. I'm a person of the earth. And I understand that, but there really is a lot of good reasons to get permits. Sometimes it's just education and education in the sense that you're letting the Forest Service know how the Forest Service or the land, how it's being used. And that's really important, I think, to like a lot of our public lands are like multiple use. Different interest groups use the forests, the public lands differently, and letting the people who take care of that land know how it's being used will help it to be managed for that. And so that's an important thing. I don't think I want to get into the long stories about how I helped put together Forest Service permits for herbs. But yeah, I did that back in the 80s. I spent a lot of time and effort into doing that and was asked more than one time to help write the permits as it got bigger and bigger. And of course, that information is now lost, except when I go to get a permit in the past years, when I go to a ranger station to get a permit, the fact that I know the permit system so well and I know exactly what to ask for, that's the reason why. It's because I know exactly how that happened. But nowadays, for Columbines, we have a completely different permit. Nowadays, for Columbines, we have a scientific and educational permit. So it's a whole different thing because of the science and the education that goes on and the teaching and the pertinent information. I mean, I think just about all the plant lists we've had for all these years and how valuable knowing what blooms in 1985 in these areas and what blooms now is really, and at what times and how that's changed is some really valuable information that at some point will be coordinated into a database for future people. But it's just really important for so many levels. And to me, one of the biggest levels, I mean, some places getting a permit is almost impossible still. And I recommend getting a hold of like a permit from some other place and bringing it to bringing it to the Forest Service or the BLM and saying, this is the permit I got from someplace else. You can help start a permit system going. And some places there's a lot of wildcrafters and they really, a big rigmarole to get a permit. Well, I always feel like if it's a real hassle to get a permit to pick plants, you know what? That means those places are really protected. That's great. But and you have to jump some hoops, but that means they care. That's an important thing, that they care, that the managers aren't just letting people gather anything they want anytime. And another thing I think is interesting is, you shouldn't have to duck when the Forest Service comes by if you're out in the woods harvesting plants. You shouldn't have to be fearful that you're doing something wrong. It should be you're gaining a very personal and primal experience of being in nature and getting food or medicine from the earth. That's a very important thing that's going on with you. And fear or paranoia shouldn't be involved in that at all. That should be completely eliminated. That's like a really good reason to get a permit in my mind. I do have to say some places you can't pick at all. You're never going to be able to, like, some places like national parks, for example. You can't pick anything in a national park. You can't even pick your nose in a national park.
Classic Columbines joke.
Well, that's Michael Moore.
I think I want to add.
Oh, is it?
I want to add one more. I like everything that's been said, but just I want to put the commercial hat on for a minute. If you're harvesting commercially, you really need to have permits or permission. There's traceability, there's traceback. If we want to talk about the word sustainability, it's really important to know that if you're harvesting commercially, even on a smaller scale, just know that those plants were coming from a legal and also which ties into sustainability. Because like Howie and others have, Leah and Alex have said, knowing where these plants are coming from and knowing that the Forest Service, if you're harvesting on public lands or BLM or private land, it also it's important to, and Howie was touching on this too, is that in the Northwest, but you can apply this to anywhere, that the forest is often managed for certain plants. In the Northwest, it's managed for timber. And so there's this concept of non-timber forest products, and just kind of letting planners of these areas know that there are species that are important other than timber is an important concept for these people who do planning and delegate the money and all that to know.
What's the next topic?
I could go 2 more. I could go 2 more hours.
Okay, sweet. All right. I still wanted to ask about the wildcrafting checklist and going your own way as a philosophy, and then closing thoughts. Do we want to skip that?
Your own way.
You can go your own way.
Climb or conduct's not the only way.
So do we want to do we want to go a little bit longer, or what are we thinking?
Go your own way. What I'm thinking about is like crossing a creek and telling people you don't have to follow Alex exactly the way that she goes. You should find your own way across the creek.
I might fall in. You
I
might
have
go that
noticed
way
if
and
I
fall
follow
in.
Alex, that it is the best way. I just noticed that, but I mean, you don't have to go her way, but yeah,
Oh, I was
whatever
gonna
easy
go that.
way.
I was gonna go that way. Alex just happened to go that way first. So
Uh,
Oh, I always thought there was a deeper meaning to it.
Fine, Howie, come on. I'll start.
well, you can
I'll lead
access the
Howie on.
space, Mason, to make it as deep as you want.
Oh, okay. I was having my own spiritual
So
experience.
there becomes a
Yes.
certain part in the field class where we allow the students to lead. It's because we want them to learn how to navigate through the forest, following deer and elk trails, following areas to maneuver through a meadow, through a clear cut, through an old growth forest, and so eventually we do the leading for weeks, and then there comes a certain part, and this is mainly in the sometimes it used to be in the late spring, but in the summer where we start allowing the students to lead. So what we would do is we'd have a student who is in the front, a teacher would be behind them, the rest of the students, and then one of the teachers would be in the back. And so then they would lead their way through the forest, and um, it was that started to become a refined learning tool and experience for that person leading, really. Um, the people in back would learn too, but the person in front has a lot of pressure. I mean, I think even in the Boy Scouts and in military, when you're learning to make a trail, where you're drawing a trail, you have someone leading who's basically bushwhacking. Excuse me. And then you have someone behind them writing what actually is the best way to go.
Hmm.
So the people in the back would learn from the person in the front, and see, oh, the person in the front might be struggling, but they see, oh, I can go this way. It's much easier. So leading, it's definitely, so you're not going to get this from the webinar or from or from
The
the
Zoom.
online
Online
class,
learning.
the Zoom class. So this was leading and going your own way, was learning how to walk through what we were teaching in the woods. Basically, it could be the desert or wherever, but and going your own way meant that you don't need to follow the leader. And actually, the ones closer to the leader are the ones the first to follow. That's the joke. It's actually a Shin song. But no, you would learn. You don't need. You can go your own way. So Howie might jump over the log because he's superhuman and like 8 foot tall. So he just walks over old growth logs, where I'm like 4 foot 3 inches, and so I would be easier crawling under the log. So you go your own way, and the same as not following the leader. But
That's what I was looking for, Stephen. Thank you.
Howie could probably add a lot more to that, and so could Leah and Alex.
you can go your own way.
Go your own way.
I think Alex really said it.
You can go
Yeah.
under. It's not the only way.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I did want to touch briefly, at least, on the Wildcrafting checklist. We talked about Herbalist, which I don't think it actually outright says that in the Wildcrafting checklist, but it definitely helps with Herbalist. And we also talked about permits, which that I believe is on. Do you have a permit? Is on the Wildcrafting checklist. Howie, can you tell us a little bit about the Wildcrafting checklist, why you created it, and where can folks actually go read it online?
Oh, it's
Well,
online. And
the whole thing is Herbalist.
What's
Sorry.
that?
The whole thing is about Herbalist.
Exactly, right? But it doesn't outright say that, though, right?
no.
No, doesn't use those words.
I
So
love it.
the checklist is a list of questions that you ask before you harvest a plant. And in Columbines, we spent a lot of time going over that list. It's something I developed back in the 80s and copyrighted in the 90s, and then some minor modifications in the 2020s or 2020s, something like that. So yeah, it's actually set up to be able to work through it in an order when you sit down with a bunch of plants before you pick. And it talks about how the plant grows, but also how the plant's related to the ecology, and and what your relationship and humans' relationships are with it, and even what your relationship is with the rest of society, along with questions like permission and permits. But I think one of the most interesting things, like I say in the interview, we'll sit down sometimes and spend 45 minutes going over the permit, but then we only pick for 10 minutes, and I envision this coyote in the back of behind some bush going, humans are crazy. Look at all that talking just for that little bit of action. But I think we could talk about specifics of the crafting checklist and different questions that they ask, and a lot of those questions you can't even answer. It's intentional. Some of those questions are questions you're supposed to have in your mind, like what effect is your harvest having on the stand? You might not know that unless you come back next year or the year after that. But those are things you still need to be aware of and think about. But I think what was really interesting is we had one student one year complain to Stephen and I about the checklist, because when they came to the plants and they thought we were going to pick it, they were all excited and couldn't wait to run out there and start picking. And then when we sat down and talked for 45 minutes or an hour, then they were like, well, I'm not really that interested in harvesting anymore, or my spark is gone. And it's like, hey, that is intentional. That is part of what that checklist is about, is to give you some time to stop and think and really settle in with this before running out the first time you see the plants and be like, oh, I want to gather. It's part of the Herbalist. It worked. I was real happy about it. They were complaining about it, but we were smiling.
There's actually quite a bit of ecology just within that wildcrafting checklist, as far as how are we interacting with the plants, how are the wildlife interacting with the plants.
Absolutely.
Watching all of that happen.
Yeah, and what's been interesting, some of the changes over the years is the addition of, has other people been harvesting here? That's an example, and that's become an interesting point, because I mean, we joke around about saying, well, do you see any garbage, or can you see that anyone's actually harvested, or do you see garbage, or do you see leftovers from people harvesting? But it also brings back to the concept of, has this been and is this still a traditionally used stand from indigenous people that lived there in the past? And it has become much more of an important point as the years have gone by of, can you recognize that? Would you be able to recognize that was the case? Would you be able to recognize that this might still be being used today by families that have been using this stand for generations? How can you tell that? Of course, sometimes it isn't easy, like, oh, I see branches cut. Sometimes it's kind of tricky. And a lot of times it goes together with the ecology that we're teaching. So that's been a very interesting and helped me over the years to see a much bigger picture. I smile there. Someone else want to say something?
Well, the wildcrafting check, I think it was great what everyone just said. But it's a 20,000-foot view on the wildcrafting checklist, is that you can get into the specifics on each plant. And like how he said, you're not going to answer all those questions, and you're going to, each time you harvest the plant and ask those questions, you'll learn more. But the wildcrafting checklist from a 20,000-foot view is more like humans are stupid, like the coyote looking behind the tree at us, is that stop, look, and listen. Don't just go harvest. Sit down with these questions and ask these questions so you can make a more informed decision in the moment on what you're doing, and then you might learn more after you harvest. You might make mistakes. Well, wildcrafters make mistakes. And the big thing is not going back to the stand, not learning from your mistakes. That's a poor wildcrafter, because a wildcrafter that says they never made a mistake is then I think they've never gone back to see if they made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Well, this is maybe where we kind of provide some closing thoughts. Really appreciate all of you taking 2 hours with us on the Herbalist Hour. And Kimberly, Herb Rally Schoolhouse member, thanks for joining us live as well. But also, Howie, congrats on 40 years. That's incredible.
40 years. I can't believe it.
That's amazing.
Years.
And we're still
all
Checks in the mail.
Checks in the mail.
Checks in the mail.
We're still offering we're still offering both in person, in the field classes, the full on apprenticeship. It's mostly full for this year, but there's still room. There's still room if people want to interview for that. And we also have online classes and in-person classes for beginning herbalism or herbal concepts class. So
Kimberly
all
wants us
those
to
things
leave
are
with a
still
song.
available.
Kimberly wants us to leave with a song. What song should we do?
I leave
Like,
with a song.
Like a
Oh,
munchy
Kimberly
munch,
says
a
the
munchy
singing and dancing
munch,
makes me
or
want to join your school. Oh man,
no,
that's
but
just what we
should
want to
leave
hear,
with a
Kimberly.
song like a munchy munch or some kind of Hitchcock kind of umbelliferae song, or we could just do a munchy munch. I mean,
Do a song where it's like a nice goodbye to everybody. Is there any of those?
oh yeah, I got one. I got one.
Okay.
But then I don't know if everyone's going to sing this one with me.
I'm not.
Come on.
What is it? Which one is this?
Once there was a little old ant.
That's what I thought you were going to do.
The trillium plant. Everyone knows that ants reseed the trillium plants because they had high
hopes. They
high
hopes.
They had high apple backache pie sky hopes. So when you're feeling down and out, just remember that ant. Oops, there
goes another trillium.
Oops, there goes another trillium.
There goes another trillium plant. Bump, ba-dum-bump.
Our students might jump onto an old growth log and do a tap dance and sing a show tune about how ants disperse the trillium seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Talk about
No
ecology.
exaggeration.
Well, that is a perfect way to wrap up. Thank you, Stephen, for leading that song. And thanks again to everybody for joining us. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Herbalist Hour.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mason. Thanks,
all.
Kimberly,
Thanks,
for putting up with us.
Spring. I can't wait to be in the field.
BotanicalStudies.net.
To those classes, maybe I can come.
Yeah, come join
You
us.
can go your own way.
Go your own way.
Get us started and we can't stop.
Munchia.
Munch. We got an herb
that's good for lunch.
Go
right,
Your stems
that's a
are
favorite.
hollow. Your skins, the carp just gives you away. Your stems are hollow. Your
umbelliferae. Oh, yes. We got to end this. I can't believe it. But
And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Herb Rally podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at Herb Rally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from Herb Rally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving text, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.